For this task, we're going to inspect emergency generators and their prime movers, utilizing our training guide and our PTC checklist. Before we begin, be aware of hazards and PPE requirements. Part of this will require the engine to run while we're in the space, so make sure you have your hearing protection with you. On board this vessel, their emergency generator is powered by an emergency diesel generator. This diesel generator is air-cooled, so instead of having a seawater suction to run through a cooler, we actually have a radiator. So we have a fan driven by a belt off the engine, which blows and forces air across the coils, much like the radiator in your car. An important thing to look at when you're verifying system components on your emergency generator is the means of starting. Means of starting can be, like discussed earlier in ship service generators, several different ways. You can have electrical, hydraulic, pneumatic, or mechanical. For emergency generators, they're required to have a secondary means of starting to recover from blackout conditions. On board here, we have an electrical starter. With your electric start, you will always have a battery bank to provide your electrical starting power. It's important when you're testing your emergency generator with electrical backup to verify on the battery charger that the battery charger recovers from the load. For your emergency generator starting, we talk about they have to have two means of starting. For this electrical setup, they have two through the electric start, meaning they have 3 starts with electric power and then enough for 3 more starts through electric power. It's important to note that when we're testing emergency generators, depending on what type of platform you're on, if they're on an international route or if they're a US domestic route, we always test the primary start. Your emergency generator space is required to be protected by a fixed firefighting system. Here we have a pre-engineered system that will activate on smoke or heat detection and can be activated manually outside the space. One of the components of this is that it automatically secures the prime mover itself. Typically this testing is done when the system is serviced and not during inspection time. Depending on the vessel setup, there may or may not be a fuel tank for the emergency generator installed in the space. This particular case, the emergency generator is sitting on top of its fuel tank. Depending on the vessel's route, whether it's international or domestic, there is a requirement for fuel tanks over 500 liters in the same space to have an external fuel shutoff valve. Now we're going to talk about the emergency panel and the emergency bus ties. Under normal conditions, when the vessel is operating under ship service generators, if for whatever reason there's a drop in voltage or one of the generators secures on a safety alarm, this panel will sense the loss of voltage and automatically open the emergency distribution panel. The emergency distribution panel, which is this here, all of these breakers are normally supplied by ship service power. As soon as there's a drop in voltage, it will automatically disconnect, which means power is no longer supplied to any of this, because power is no longer being supplied to any of the rest of the vessel. The system senses that and immediately starts the emergency generator. Once the emergency generator comes up to operating parameters, the panel senses that it has good voltage and good hertz and is operating. It will automatically close your emergency bus tie, which is this right here, immediately supplying power to all of the breakers indicated here. In this case, your steering pumps, air compressors, fire pump, bilge pump, and your emergency distribution panel, which will cover your radios, navigation equipment, lighting, stuff like that. It's important to, It's important to note that if power is restored by the ship's crew under normal ship service generators, it requires somebody to come up here and physically disconnect and re-engage, It's important to note that if ship's power is restored through the ship service generators, this requires somebody to physically come up here and open your bus tie so they can close your distribution panel to be resupplied by ship's power. Depending on the vessel or platform you're on and starting the emergency generator, make sure you always have the vessel's crew start and do any of the manipulation of any equipment on board. If we're doing a simple start of the emergency generator, we'll have the Make sure that the emergency bus tie is closed. Make sure you verbally communicate that with the crew and make sure they know that we're not going full load on the emergency generator. It's important because if the vessel is in port conducting cargo operations, they could be swinging cranes, running hydraulic equipment, doing some pretty dangerous stuff. If all of a sudden we decide that we're going to shut down all electrical power, we may cause some serious safety issues on deck. So make sure you verify and confirm with whoever you're conducting these tests with that we're not going to take a load on the emergency generator. Once the generator starts, we'll come over to the panel here and verify that we have good voltage, that we have the right frequency. Depending on whether or not you have a load, you may or may not see anything on your amps here. Summarize what we've been talking about with emergency generators and their prime movers. We're going to utilize the PTC checklist to make sure we haven't missed anything. We talked about hazards, cautions, and PPE to wear when conducting examinations and inspections on board emergency generators. We talked about the starting system, having a primary and secondary, and always testing on the primary system. We talked about how the auto emergency bus works. For material condition of components of the engine, alarm set points, and gauges, refer to the ship service generator video as it explains all the same stuff. We also talked about how, for this case, there's a fuel tank on board and how it has to have an emergency shut-off valve. And we also talked about the pre-engineered fix system on board and how it has to secure the engine and how we test that during fire servicing. If at any point during this video you have any questions or you want to know a little bit more, please write down anything you have and talk to your local VO.